For record-keeping purposes, if you wish to make a statement regarding any item on the agenda, please complete the form located at the entrance or at the rear of the council chambers and deposit it with the Planning and Housing Commission Secretary. Good evening. Welcome to the Planning and Housing Commission meeting. Commissioner Siquelin will lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Persons wishing to address the Planning and Housing Commission are requested to state their name for the record. This portion of the agenda is intended for public comment. State law prohibits the Planning and Housing Commission from discussing or taking action on items not listed on the agenda. The Planning and Housing Commission will appreciate your cooperation in keeping your comments brief. Please observe a 3-minute limit to communications. Ms. Capilla, did we receive any speaker cards or written comments for the public, from the public for items not on the agenda?
No, Chair Woody, we did not receive any speaker cards nor written comments.
Okay, very good. Next up is the approval of meeting minutes for the Planning and Housing Commission meeting of October 23rd, 2023. Did we receive any speaker cards or comments regarding those minutes?
No, Chair Woody.
All right, very good. Do we have a motion regarding the minutes?
I'll move.
I'll second.
All right, please vote. Okay, the minutes have been approved. And we have no consent items or hearings tonight. Let's see, have we, Ms. Capilla, have we received any communication from persons providing information or seeking action by the Planning and Housing Commission?
No, Chair.
All right. So with all that done, however, we do have a report tonight from our Associate Planner, Mr. Aguilar.
Good evening, Chair and Commissioners. My name is Renee Aguilar, Associate Planner. Tonight I will be presenting a request to process a zone text amendment. More specifically, staff is asking the Planning Commission to provide direction to staff on whether to proceed with the applicant's request. Applicant Todd Siegel with GTS Realty submitted a written request requesting a zone text amendment to amend the city's commercial and office zones ordinance to allow thrift stores in the C2 zone, restricted commercial zone. The applicant represents Temescal Village Plaza, which owns a 3.94 acre commercial property located at 1191 Magnolia Avenue. The property is part of a larger 10.41 acre shopping center located at the northwest corner of Rimpau Avenue and Magnolia Avenue. As you can see on the screen, thrift stores are not allowed in the C2 zone and only in the C3 zone by right. The applicant has provided informational documentation to show that thrift stores have become widely accepted by newer generation, local communities, and reduce impacts on the environment, and that the use is similar to other uses currently permitted in the C2 zone. For reference, the purpose of the C2 zone, the C2 and the C3 zones as stated under section 17.33030 of the Corona Municipal Code are as follows. The C2 zone is intended for a limited range of commercial uses that serve the local community needs, provide a buffer between residential properties and higher intensity uses, and will be encouraged to be compatible with adjacent land uses. Now, the C3 zone is intended for higher intensity commercial uses that serve community and sub-regional needs with emphasis on convenient automobile access while incorporating efficient, safe, and attractive on-site pedestrian circulation. The proposed amendment to the Corona Municipal Code, Section 17.33.030 is shown on the table before us. The proposed language is shown in the underlined format. If you look at the PowerPoint, this C2 zone, as of right now, shows that thrift stores are not permitted, and then this amendment would change the not permitted to permitted. Now, per the Corona Municipal Code, the Planning and Housing Commission must first make a motion to initiate the proceedings prior to processing a zone text amendment and holding a public hearing. If the Planning and Housing Commission makes the motion and it passes, it then directs staff to process a zone text amendment, and the applicant will need to submit a zone text amendment application to the city. Lastly, the zone text amendment application will be subject to the Planning and Housing Commission's review. Now, planning staff did receive a public comment from Michelle Heasley expressing her concerns that thrift stores may have a long-term effect within the city. She asked that thrift stores not be allowed within the C2 zone unless done so but on a case-by-case with each applicant applying for a conditional use permit or a variance. She states that thrift stores are known to have issues with donation bins scattered in parking lots and behind buildings, illegal dumping, and potential spread of pests to neighboring buildings from the bins, and also unhoused residents sorting through the items dumped. She concludes with stating that the city of Corona needs to look at these applications individually to ensure minimalization of negative impacts. This concludes my presentation for tonight. Please let me know if there are any questions, and the applicant is available to answer any via Zoom. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Aguilar. Commissioners, any questions for Mr. Aguilar about the item?
I do.
Thank you, Chair. I did have a question as far as the overall process, not necessarily your report. Thank you very much. I appreciated the bottom of page 2, where it outlines the differences, because when I'm reading the report, I'm looking at what was the original thought behind designating general versus restricted. And so your definitions were very clear for that. Clear that up for me. Thank you. Normally, I think this is unusual, though, and this is going on the end of my 5th year. So when an applicant comes forward for a specific reason for a specific site location, that's what they're trying to address, either a variance or a CUP. And when they would want that consideration, that's how they move forward. So as I read the applicant's request, it seems to be a broad stroke of brush across all the C2s in order to accommodate their one specific site at 1191 Magnolia. So I'm just wondering, could there have been a smaller size request or process by the applicant? I'm just curious.
So the way it works is the property is zone C2. So if thrift stores aren't allowed use in the C2 zone, they would have to be allowed in all properties that are zone C2.
So there's no variance in that specific shopping center?
No, if the Planning and Housing Commission wants to put a restriction on that use, then the conditional use permit would be the appropriate method.
So because our municipal code shows it as a non-permitted use, there's really no way to get the use permitted unless you're going to change the zoning ordinance. So for example, if this use was not listed, let's say, thrift stores were not specifically called out, they could have come in and maybe tried to apply for a similar use permit and say, we feel this use is similar to other uses in the zone, but that's not the case here. We specifically call it out as not permitted. Therefore, to try to go about it in a way to get it permitted other than doing an amendment, there is no other way. This is the way. So you are correct. It would open it up to everything that's Zone C2. You're basically changing the code and saying, we're now going to allow thrift stores in a broader range within the city, not just in the C3 zone, but in the C2 zone as well.
Thank you.
So essentially, this is, since it's a non-permitted use, this was kind of parallel to the Los Arcos sign. And in that case, we had a zone text amendment, right, that was drawn very specifically, I guess you would say, so that it in reality, it probably won't apply to other properties, even though it potentially could.
That's correct, because when you're dealing with a sign ordinance, in the case of Los Arcos, you're regulating time, place, and manner, because you're regulating the type of sign based on its location, size, and height. When it comes to a land use per se, there's not a time, place, and manner regulation. It is strictly a land use, and is it appropriate for the zone? So sign ordinance are very specific because you're regulating time, place, and manner, and you're not specifically doing that in this case. If a thrift store is allowed in a C2 zone, we're just going to apply the C2 zone development standards to make sure it adheres to that if one ever opens up in a C2 zone.
Okay.
And I have one more follow-up question then. So, yeah, the chart that was in the report and that Mr. Aguilar had on the screen had the C2 use, the C3, and then CP, but I didn't, I don't think there was a description of CP. So I'd like, if possible, somebody could provide the distinction between CP and the other zones, and then my other question would be what category like dollar stores fall into?
The CP zone, for reference, is intended primarily for uses conducted in offices or often associated with or supporting uses in offices.
A dollar store would be a retail use,
It would be, I'm sorry?
a general retail use.
General retail, okay.
Two questions. First is, suppose that we do provide a recommendation to move forward with the zone text amendment. In understanding the presentation, the applicant would still have to then file that with us. This commission would then review that application. That makes sense. Does it then mean that if it is approved, that forever, now C2 would include thrift store, and then a future application in another location would then be by right and would not even come before the commission, or would future applications still have to be approved under this change?
So it could go either way. Yes, just to confirm, a zone text amendment application would have to come back before you for consideration, and with that application, staff would do a more thorough analysis of the use and present that to you for consideration. If the Planning Housing Commission would like to allow for the use to be permitted by right, then that means thrift stores could go into any C2 zone property by right, and it would not come back before you. But if the Planning and Housing Commission's wish is to allow for the use by conditional use permit, then that conditional use permit would come to you every time a thrift store wants to go in a C2 zoned location. So it would be specific to a location and by CUP.
Understood. So actually then the commission here has other options. One of those could be then to say that all future applications have to be via a CUP.
In the C2 zone, correct.
In the CT zone. All right. And then the other question is, and I'm sorry I didn't call earlier, do we know if this type of application for a thrift store has previously been circulated before the city? I know in my term it hasn't, but I'm just curious if this has come up previously in any other applications.
It has not come up before.
Okay. That's it for now.
I had a follow-up question, Chair. So for a CUP, it isn't regulated as far as renewal. It's in place, correct? Until there's perhaps a violation or some other condition warrants it to come forward for reconsideration, or how does that work?
That is correct. It runs with the land unless we decide to revoke it, correct?
Thank you.
I have a question. Oh, I'm sorry. I have a question. Is this a comprehensive list of the CP, C2, and C3 land use? Are there other land uses that is just a small list?
This is a list of similar uses.
Similar.
As close as possible to a thrift store, but of course, the list
Okay.
is a little bit bigger, yeah.
Okay.
And, I'm sorry. Yeah, so this shopping center that we're talking about is currently C3 zoned. What about what's the zoning on?
C2.
C2, right, I'm sorry. C2. So what's the zoning on the other nearby commercial centers? Like, if you went across Rimpaw, I guess, to the east, that shopping center, or then, heading across Magnolia from that center to the south, which is a much larger center. Okay, do you know what the zoning is?
Yes, the one to the south on the other side of Magnolia Avenue, that's C3. And then to the east on the other side of Rimpel, I believe the corner parcel that contains McDonald's is C3, and then the remaining portion of the shopping center is C2.
The shopping center area that's got Sizzler, that is C2.
I believe that is correct.
Okay. Is it reasonable to request to know what is the zoning for the Salvation Army that's a few miles up north?
The one on 6th Street, that is M1. That is a light manufacturing zone.
Do we know how many thrift stores are around Corona?
We do not have a number, but that would be part of our analysis when we come back before you with the zone text amendment application.
I think I know how many.
On the table here, the top left, I think we know what permitted use is, we know what a conditional use permit is. But could you explain what a minor conditional use permit is, what that distinction means? And then also what the Board of Zoning Adjustment, what that table item means?
Sure. So the minor conditional use permit goes before the city's Board of Zoning Adjustment. It's basically the authority right below the Planning and Housing Commission. The Board of Zoning Adjustment is made up of 3 board members. It's a member from the Planning Department, Public Works Department, and Building Division.
And the minor conditional use permit, is that?
It's very similar to a regular conditional use permit in that it runs with the land.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, does the commission, any other questions for staff at this point?
Yes, I have a question. This may be kind of discombobulated, but I'm thinking I read Ms. Heasley's objection regarding the thrift stores. Now, when we allow our permitted use, is a part of our responsibility to regulate how they conduct the business, like her concerns about the milling around, the illegal dumping and those things. Personally, I know every thrift shop in Corona, and I remember there used to be so many more, and not one thrift shop in Corona has these concerns. All of them are highly regulated. Would we, as a commission, be able to stipulate those things as well?
So that could be part of the zone text amendment. Staff could propose regulations similar to regulations that we currently have in place. For example, like smoking lounges, we do have supplemental development standards for smoking lounges. And that type of use actually requires a minor conditional use permit that goes before the BZA.
Yeah, I'm 100% for it by the simple fact that everything that is in the land use is what's sold inside of Savers, everything. And nothing that I ever delivered or any time I've ever been has shown there to be any loitering, any congregating, any dumping of any kind. So it's the only one that's not permitted, yet it sells, it's got commerce for all of these things. That's my opinion.
This may be a legal question that would have to be resolved, but I'm kind of playing this out of my mind of, before us is direction on changing the municipal code. On the other hand, if we were to approve this and theoretically say that it's all applications in the future for this change would require a CUP, could those applications potentially be, if they were denied, could they be then challenged by the applicant from a legal basis? Is there a risk of us, by us not changing the code, if this were not to be moved forward, there's no risk there because the code is the code. But if we open that box up and then grant a CUP in the future, could that applicant then pursue that if we were to deny it?
So with a CUP, you have findings that you have to make. So staff always presents you with the findings for approving, and those are based on the findings in the CMC. They're not arbitrary findings. So if, for whatever reason, this body disagreed with staff and disagreed with the findings that were presented to the commission, we rely on the commission to tell us, well, why does it not meet the findings? And that is the information you need to stipulate back to us in order to deny the permit. We actually have to hear verbally what that is. So yeah, this commission cannot always agree with staff, but as you know, it's based on the findings of approval or the findings for denying the permit.
Question.
It's just not arbitrarily, I don't like it. It has to be based on the circumstances that were listed in the code.
Sure, which we would have had to define in any recommendation we give to you in what the process is to approve a future application.
Well, the CUP already has those findings in its own chapter. So every CUP that comes before you has the same set of findings that we make for every CUP. They are not different.
Great, okay, so you would apply that same CUP
Yes.
guideline
Yes.
if we were to recommend a CUP process in this. Okay, that makes sense, thank you. I just didn't want us to be the ones to decide all the technical language of something if we did go that route.
Does staff have reports on the additional thrift shops or stores that exist in Corona? Do we have police reports? Do we have statistics on the dumping or and those negatives? Do we have anything to substantiate?
We haven't done that analysis yet, but we can do that analysis when we present the zone text amendment application to you.
Okay. Well, Commissioner Alexander, I overheard, does have some of those. I'm looking forward to hearing it.
I was going to see if the question period was over, Chair, and then, but if you're ready to move forward, I could do that.
And we do have the applicant's representative on Zoom if we wanted to open this discussion to, it's not a public hearing, but I believe that they would like to speak, and this is an opportunity for them to chime in as well on their request.
I mean, I think I've asked my questions thus far. I may have some more as we move forward, but for now, I'm.
Okay, so Commissioner Alexander wondered if we have any more questions or comments to make, or if we should give the staff direction regarding this.
Well,
Did I understand you correctly?
You were asking for questions. I don't have any questions for staff, but I do have comments as to reading the report and wanting to share with you all, but I don't know the appropriate order here.
Sure, go for it.
Okay. And I've asked staff to go ahead and put up some overheads. So if you could put up the first one, please. What I did was when I read the staff report and it talked about C2 and C3, I kind of wanted to know what the impact would be. What are we talking about? How many parcels are there? How many polygons? So what he's putting up there now is when you go on the city website and they have an interactive user map for the public. Yeah, it's upside down. There you go. So what I did was I went in and said, okay, give me all the C2 zones in the city. And these polygons came up. So you can see that the applicants in C2, which is non-permitted thrift shops. So I counted them and there are 9. So could I have the next one, please? So then I did the same for C3 and there's 34. There were some tiny ones in there. I might have miscounted, but basically. So if you can see your earlier question, Chair, about the proximity of what's across the street, there's a C3, 3 of them actually in proximity of the site in question. So those do allow thrift shops by the staff's code, Mr. Aguilar's addition there in Zone 3 for what is for higher intensity commercial uses. Could you go ahead and put on? So if you look at the numbers then, so for 9 of them for C2 and 34 of them, this city offers 74% more opportunities for thrift stores than not when you compare 9 to 34. So that struck me. That answered my question as to what the impact would be. How restrictive are we? I mean, because in the 62-page document that the applicant prepared, the hired legal person did, I mean, it's insinuating that we're not doing our part. There's more to a greater extent. And I think the city does a great job of offering opportunities. And if you go back, please, to the C3, if you go back to the C3 and you look, there are so many opportunities for thrift stores. It's not like we're looking the other way. It's not like we're impeding the progress of opening these opportunities for lower income, for the adjustments to the environment. I think the city does a very good job compared to restricting them, right? So if we could go on to, there we go. So this is D. Now this is my wheelhouse for the last 4 years. I've been working with the thrift stores. I work with picking up donations. I deliver them to a warehouse, and then I help CityNet and Mercy House house unhoused. So I'm very familiar. Settlement House has been in town forever, as you all know. And when Sally was over there, she was constantly struggling to keep up with the drop-offs and the dumping. They put fencing up, they put signage up, and it was still a problem. So, and because everyone knew that they helped distribute goods and not during business hours, it was the reality. So St. Edward's Thrift Store was, until they closed recently, operated by Virginia Caridi. And Virginia had a conversation, more than one, that this is a constant problem on 6th Street, on the side street, posting signage, no dumping, et cetera. So I know it's a problem with thrift stores. Magical Beginnings, I went over there to West Grand, 514 South Smith, and they weren't open. I wasn't able to talk to them, but there's a sign right there in the window. If you leave your donations when the store is closed, the homeless will rummage through it, make a mess in front of the store. So they're trying their best to plead with the public not to do it, but it's a continual problem. Going over to New Hope Thrift Store, they're new owners. The gal was super sweet. She goes, we're not even advertising for donations, and we get them in the front and the back already, and we don't need them right now. Salvation Army over there that you brought up, they're on a separate isolated parcel. They're kind of, doing their own thing, and there isn't a business nearby that's going to be impacted, just the public driving by. So talking to the gentleman who take the donations and the 3 trailers they have, he said, basically, we have all morning to clean up. It's not every day, but every week, and folks drop off things that are acceptable and are not. And maybe that's why they drop it off after hours, because they don't want to be stuck with something that they don't accept. I'm not sure what the reason is. Could I see the next one, please? Thank you. So Corona has a strategic plan, and it's a good neighbor policy, and it's thought of It's interwoven in all the policy decisions, the programs, and for existing neighbors and residents, we have to consider, and we do this on this body too. We want to mitigate the negative impact for neighbors, right? So went over and spent the day and knocked on a few doors. And overall, and I'm not going to identify specific tenants because they don't want to be have anything come against them for speaking their mind, but they're the ones out there living every day. It's their businesses, right? So as you can see, they don't like that space is not filled. They want it occupied just like anyone else. But they're concerned with these things here, attracting more homeless, messy conditions. They already have homeless sleeping on their back doorsteps and on the side alleys there. There's illegal dumping inside and out of the dumpsters. The retail, I didn't speak to that childcare place, but the one on McKinley, I spoke to the director there, and she says that's a real problem. I would think that, no, I don't want a donation. She says the retail portion has a good, that's a good business model, but the donation part is the problem. So the current homeless conditions over there will just increase if things are dropped off. Thank you. So I don't know about you, but I never heard of Savers. So I apologize, but I wanted to know more, So I went over. They have this store, beautiful inside store, very neat, very organized. It's so well laid out. I'm telling you, it was impressive. So I was over there for about an hour and a half, and I was watching mostly for the drop-off and the donations, that system that occurs on the side of the building. And it was a very small door to get inside. There were boxes stacked outside. There was furniture that was held over from the morning that hadn't been brought in. While I was there, a gentleman walked up and he wanted to buy. So there's this pandering going back and forth. I was instructed to go inside. But the vehicles, while all this is going on and the bins were backed up and they weren't being processed, it created impact to the circulation within the area on the side there with the other neighboring. And then as far as my car, I couldn't get out waiting for this line. So talking to the neighboring business adjacent to this, they have front row seats from their windows to the drop-off area, the donation area. And it is a problem. They have homeless over there, and they go through the after-hour donations, and they create a mess. The gentleman says he, just by the nature of his business, is there late at night, and he can see the drop-offs, he can see the homeless, and he goes, when they leave, it really creates a problem. And it's left for Savers personnel coming in the morning to clean it up. And talking to the donation folks who were doing it, they said, yeah, it's just something that happens and we take care of it. The apartment resident walked by and she said this creates unwanted people in their neighborhood. She goes, there's children and there's concerns. I also called their Yorba Linda store, and I wanted to see, is this just an isolated incident? And I spoke to a gentleman who said, although they probably don't have the homeless problems that we have over here in Riverside County, they do have homeless there, and they do have after-hour drop-offs. They put signs up. They create an area where it's not easily accessible, and it still gets broken into. Things are left out or weather damaged. And it was fun. He says, well, if you want to open up a thrift store, I'd suggest doing it on a smaller scale so there's less impact and you have a better management of the operations. One more, please. Okay, so that's all I have. And so here's my point is that with all that said, I think the city, go back to the second one, please, of C3. There it is there. One more, please. So I guess my point is the city has invested a lot of money into homeless solutions, right? They have a success story of placements. They've got a system of services. They've got all these things. And so I'm hesitant to allow a change in zoning when there's obviously other opportunities. It may not be this suite in this shopping center. It may not be this intersection, but there's obviously other opportunities. In fact, right across the street where it says proximity to the Temescal Village, there's a huge shopping center over there. So it's not like the city isn't doing their part. There certainly is opportunity. And I like that the staff has outlined the C2 versus the C3. And I do believe that when we agreed to Bedford Marketplace down there, that was a neighborhood shopping area. And they drew the distinction that it's different than Crossings or Dos Lagos, which is more C3, fits the definition C3. So I personally am not in favor of making this broad stroke of amendment to C2 to fit this one applicant for this one tenant. I think the city has done a good job for other opportunities. Thank you.
Ms. Alexander, that was great. Thank you for the detail, because I'm familiar with the one in Yorba Linda.
Oh, you are?
Yeah, but just I have family there, but I didn't really have the depth of knowledge that your fact-finding did.
Well, and I don't want to say there was nothing wrong with the store. You go in there, it's impressive, the amount of associates to customers. But when I went through and I talked to the customers, I said, well, how many deals? Did you find any good deals, you know? And a lot of them were talking about the trends that the 62-page document talks about trends, but a different trend. And that is, once you're a thrift store shopper, you get used to, you have that background, you know, either you or your children, you know, it's an attractive destination and the experience. And their store, there was nothing wrong with it at all. But the end of it isn't the retail, it's the donation aspect of it, which is an integral part of Savers, apparently.
For me, when I think of amendment, I think of something that's very compelling. There's a reason to make a change to something that's actually part of our code. I mean, it's our laws on how we operate the city. And it's, the codes are work of multiple years and decades of getting to why codes are defined the way they are. And so for me, when I saw amendment, I'm like, okay, it's retail. This is, to me, not something so compelling that it warrants an amendment. And then actually to see the data point that I didn't have was the comparison of C3 to C2. And seeing that for me at 73.5%, that's pretty compelling the other way, that, wow, there's a lot of opportunity for this type of business to operate in our city already without having to make an amendment. And so my opinion would be, or my feeling is that this is not compelling enough to me to say, wow, we need to amend our city code to allow this retailer or other retailers in the future to operate in these smaller centers. So from my standpoint, I don't support the idea of moving forward with an amendment.
Can we go back to Commissioner Alexander's screen for the C2 and the C3 zoning? Where it showed 39 and 34?
It's the one before that. It's Exhibit B and Exhibit A. So the one shows C3, you can see on the top right, there's 34. There might be 35. There were some very small ones.
Okay, so the 34 C3s, it's not clear enough for me to see, but I'm trying to figure out where these are in these three circles at the top left.
That is along 6th Street, and there is Lincoln. So 6th and Lincoln, basically.
Okay, so these are all C3s, and these are areas that would be able to support a thrift shop, correct?
From the city's
Okay.
definition, correct?
So this is, and I'm going to stay on this for a minute because my opposition is this. We're talking density, we're talking keeping them very small, and while the individual that you interviewed said, and it sounds nice, to keep the thrift shops small enough so that they can control the traffic. I believe that we need the larger Goodwill, Salvation Army, and Savers, because myself, a parent of 6 millennials with a plethora of young adults who now only find it chic and hip to shop, and you know, the old clothing, they want all the throwback items. They're going to find that, yes, in those little small boutique type shops, but for families, I did my own research simply because that's where I shop every day. I will not go to Ross and TJ Maxx without going to Savers first or going to Goodwill in Norco. They all have excellent drop-off, and I don't even believe that even if I've gone at night, I've had my trunk right now, it's full with a couple of bins as my daughter is leaving town. We're taking things there. It's after hours. Homeless people are not sleeping there. They're looking for something, and then they're moving on to where they're going to actually live. The lighting is perfect. There's enough police traffic and activity that it's really not the picture that's painted for me. I feel safe going to Salvation Army or any of the Savers or any of the Goodwills because I know it's shut down, it's closed. I can't leave anything there for fear that I'm on the camera. My problem is where all of these C3 zones are, I really don't want a thrift shop there because that is where, when we have the bin at the Miguel's parking lot, that bin, once it's full, that's where you're going to see the problem. I would like to visit that again. We need more bins because you're going to see a problem there because then people will just leave their things out. There's furniture and all of that, but not at a thrift shop. And Savers is impeccably run. There, you know, the statement, let's go to the next exhibit. It's too dense, in my opinion, to put thrift shops. St. Edward's, I want to go to the list of all the thrift shops. One of the things that was appealing to me when I moved to Corona 28 years ago was how many thrift stores there were. St. Edward's, at the time, when I was a young parent with all of my children in grade school, St. Edward's had a program where they gave vouchers for low-income families to shop. If they had anything on the side, that small street leading to the school, it was so small that I knew Mr. Franklin, I think his last name. There were 2 gentlemen who would just come and put it in the truck or put it on, you know, people would move it on the side. It was never piled up like in the city of Oakland where I'm too familiar with their homeless. Corona has policing of the homeless population. We have the Homeless Solutions, which I'm a part of, that there's nowhere in the city of Corona where unwanted dumping occurs, where there's anything that's going to sit for any length of time. St. Edward's is gone, unfortunately. Magical Beginnings, I'm familiar. I go to it probably 3 times a week looking for things. The thrift store that's at the corner of Grand and 6th next to the dental office. I don't know her name anymore. I mean, the new person, I saw her yesterday. I didn't introduce myself. I just like to do my shopping and move on. I don't like to be socializing. But that place, there's no dumping at the back. I've been there in the morning. I've driven there late evening. There's nothing that they have sitting in the back. They have a great big storage. They're really good. Those thrift stores that exist in Corona are very good about making sure that they don't incur the wrath of the city by having, you know, unwanted the look. But I think strongly that Savers is going to be good because it will help families who are struggling financially. There are mothers and fathers. There are whole families there. I've brought generations there myself. My 92-year-old mother, as well as seen parents and grandparents shopping with children. It's almost like a playground, and everything that's in there is of top quality. The staff, the door and the entrance to the Riverside County Savers is small because they don't allow people to go in. It's staffed. There's about 10 individuals. If you go at any time of the day, there's a minimum of 8 to 10 employees taking the donations. There are bins lined up, as many rows of bins, and we don't have to lift it to put things in. They take it from your car. You back it up, and they'll do it. And I love that you answered the one question that I had, the ZTA, Supplemental Developmental Standards as well. We can outline things. I don't think that we should look at the C3, because the NIMBYism is horrible in Corona and the United States. We don't want it, but we don't mind going there. You're not even familiar with the thrift shops. You've never been in Savers until now. That Savers was my life, and Savers is the life of my neighbors and my friends. And I think that if we don't do it, we're going to never get thrift shops and thrift stores that we need in those small C3 areas. They're too small. They're not going to house a Savers. It'll be like Los Angeles County that doesn't want Walmart. But we all love Walmart. We need to shop there, but they don't want it there. They want to keep the small stores. I get it. It's density. But when we have the space, and that corner in Corona has had so much trouble keeping just that little pizza joint open. They need something that's going to bring in revenue, that's going to bring in traffic. And I think like Savers in Riverside is on the side of Best Buy. And neither one of them have any dumping whatsoever. I've been to every Savers. I was introduced to Savers in Texas, and I came looking for them in California. I'm a big proponent of the Savers. I think they're better than Goodwill. Their prices are better than Goodwill.
Well, Chair, if I could just address some of the things you brought up. I'm not saying no to Savers. I just don't think, in fact, across the street, that's a huge center over there. It is Zone C3, and Savers would do well over there. That wasn't my point at all. I was very impressed with their during business hours, their operations, the efficiency of unloading and helping the customers and bringing it into the store. That wasn't my point. It's the after hours that I have concerns about. And regarding the one on West Grand, the new owner was the one who told me that her husband saw the dumping by their cars, and they hadn't even been advertised. The New Beginnings, there was a gentleman, a homeless gentleman sleeping, and he pulled the dumpster out, and he was laying down there sleeping outside of the Magical. So I see your point. I just don't know that a broad stroke for C2 is appropriate this time.
I'm going to still finish. I feel this way. We can't tell the owner of a lot to take it across the street when we don't know that he owns it. So if he doesn't own it, how can we send him across the street for something that we still need?
Well, I just want to jump in. I appreciate all the comments the commissioners have made. I appreciate the vice chair's perspective on this, providing context that I think the rest of us don't have. I think that's one of the great things about how this commission works. Everybody brings something different. I really appreciate Commissioner Alexander's effort in doing some research, compiling the different exhibits that were displayed on the screen for us. That was very valuable information for me, and I sense for the other commissioners as well. At this point, what I will say is I think there are plenty of opportunities for Savers to come into Corona. I think the map that we had on the screen demonstrated that, as was mentioned, right across the street in the shopping center that formerly had a Ralph's grocery store and has many other shops there. That's a C3 zoned center, and would potentially be a great location for Savers. I think what we have here is one particular shopping center, wants to bring in a particular tenant that they're not allowed to bring in. And so their solution is to have us change the city code to accommodate them. And so I'm not inclined to do that because I think, it's not a city problem. It's a single landlord problem. So I think if I'm hearing all the commissioners correctly, there's 3 of us who are in favor of not pursuing a zone text amendment on this, and 1 who is open to it.
And if I could just add one thing, Ms. Vernon, I think your comments were well-suited and very heartfelt and appropriate. I didn't mention, my support of the fact that what a thrift store is and what Savers can bring, because I frankly, what I'm more focused on is I kind of removed that application from the analysis and said, is this, in my opinion, warranted an amendment? And I still stand with that direction, but I do acknowledge, Ms. Vernon, you're right, it does serve a need in the city. And I think that need exists. There's plenty of other locations within the city that, unfortunately, in this case, it's not zoned appropriately for that, and that happens time and time again, and it will solve itself one way or another. I just don't feel that a zone text amendment is appropriate in this case. I do think that it's a very viable thing to have in the community, but for me, I think I need to separate those 2 things. They are separate in my mind.
I have a question. So a zone text amendment, is that the only way that they can get the store there, or is it a conditional use permit?
No, at this particular location, it would have to be a zone text amendment, but that's what we're saying. There are other locations that they could potentially pursue, if Savers could.
And across the street, the other way, on the other side, in the Sizzler, that's Zone C3. It's another larger suite area. So I agree with Commissioner Sicklin. Your points are valid. I had not been into a Savers before. Doesn't mean I haven't been to thrift stores before, because I have. But I wanted to understand what their operations was. I wanted to see the impact to the neighboring communities. I'm a strong supporter of being a good neighbor. Existing businesses have a right to operate just as well as any thrift store does. It was interesting in talking to the thrift store owners here in Corona and to get their history, since they've been owners for a while in one capacity or another in this in their wheelhouse, and to see how times have changed. I know the applicant spoke in the 62 pages about trends over the years and how popular they are with good reason, especially with the younger generation. In fact, while I was there, a mom and her daughter came in and they were shopping and finding all kinds of good things at the Corona, the smaller one. So it's also a trend, though, to get their input as to how it's impacted the smaller businesses, the big jumbo stores. They're becoming fast and furious, and it does impact their pricing versus the smaller mom and pops are able to keep it at the discount bargain prices. That was their feedback. Thank you.
Chair
Okay.
Woody, if I could interject, we have a speaker card from Mr. Morgan, and I'm not sure if the applicants wanted to speak, our attendees on Zoom.
Yeah, is this,
If we have people from the public that want to speak, we do have to let them
Yeah.
have the opportunity to speak, and they get their 3 minutes. So yes, I definitely want to make sure we are not shutting them out of being able to speak on this topic.
perfect, sure. Let's hear from Mr. Morgan.
So I live right up the street from the center. I think we have to remind, this isn't about Savers. I've heard nothing but good things about Savers, but not all thrift stores are Savers. And so to change wholesale the zone for the whole city seems really excessive. I could kind of see changing it to allowed by CUP. That way you could put some restrictions on it and you can really examine how the place could work, would work, should work, and put some, clamp it down. I could kind of see that. It makes sense. But just to allow it seems crazy. As particularly in that center, that CVS wasn't that busy and there wasn't that much parking. It's a kind of a smaller, more compact center than the one across the street. But, I'm thinking about, so the center directly across Rimpaw is C2. So the front part with the gas station and the drive-through is C3, because that's a C3 thing. but the back part is C2. You know, and that's the same thing. It's more dense, less parking. You know, it's just it's more kind of squished in, smaller units. If you go across the street where O'Reilly's and El Super is, it's a bigger, more spread out center. You know, you could kind of see, you know, and there's room around the back. It's more set up for the truck traffic, and it's not sitting next to houses either. So, you know, to put it in a smaller, more compact, more impactful thing to residential is not a good idea. It's just not a good idea. I mean, I've been to plenty of thrift stores, and I haven't seen one that didn't have a dumping problem. I remember going to St. Edwards all along Crawford. Every single night they were having to call the city out to pick up large items and big piles of stuff. Sometimes they would pull it in, but a lot of times that stuff isn't any good. People just dump stuff after hours, you know, and then, as I understand it, Savers processes that in the front. How are you going to do that at that location, that particular location? How is that ever going to work? Again, there wasn't any parking when it was a CVS, when it was purely retail. It strikes me that a thrift store is kind of in this gray area between almost like a manufacturing, you know, almost like an industrial zone. You're bringing things in and processing it, calling it the same as a UPS store. That's ridiculous. That's just laughable. You know, I bring in a box from Amazon and drop it on the counter and walk out. To say that's the same as somebody bringing in, you know, six trash bags of old clothes, and then somebody's got to pick through it, decide what they're going to keep, what they're going to take, what needs to get rehabbed and what doesn't. That's almost manufacturing. I mean, that's a lot more impactful than a UPS store, you know. And meanwhile, there's not that much parking in that center to begin with. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Morgan. And then, Ms. Capia, if the applicant wants 3 minutes to address this commission, we're open to that. It's up to them.
They would not have a time limit if they chose to speak.
All right?
This is Todd Siegel. How are you? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, sir.
Okay. You know, I will not take unlimited time. I appreciate you hearing this. I appreciate the discussion about it. Don't necessarily agree with everything that was said. Not sure whatever I say is going to change anyone's mind, but the challenges that, you know, brought up by Ms. Alexander regarding, you know, there's 34 locations, zone C3. I think there's only 7 to 10 thrift stores in those 34 locations. It goes to show you that those locations are not conducive to thrift stores, that thrift store operators, quality, don't want to be there. There's 9 locations that are out there in the city that are zoned C2, and those are probably the more desirable locations. But at the end of the day, everything that's done in a thrift store is allowed at the property already, with the exception of new versus used. And the challenge seems to be this homeless issue, the dumping issue. Those issues occur currently in the C3 zone with these thrift stores, and putting them in those C3 zones has not alleviated those issues. The only thing that alleviates those issues is the policing and the cleaning. And when you have a quality thrift store operator, you know, Savers in particular is a pretty large operator. They have a market cap of about $2.5 billion, and they're traded on the New York Stock Exchange. They run things a little bit differently. They have stores in Murrieta. That's where I'm from. The store Murrieta, I've not seen those problems at that store. You know, Riverside, Moreno Valley, Temecula, they don't regulate them to certain zones. They make sure whatever zone they're in, they make sure they run a quality operation. And I think that's the issue. We want a quality operation. It's not pushing them into a certain zone that's going to assure these problems don't happen. It's wherever they are, they need to run a quality operation, invest the time, energy, and money into making sure things don't come up. I am not opposed to doing a CUP as opposed to unilateral zone change, but the only method that was available to us was to come in and have a zone change. If that zone change is, instead of just using a P as permitted, make it a P subject to a CUP, you know, that seems to make sense. And, you know, and that's it. I mean, I have a lot of other things I can say. it's getting late. I'm sure people want to go home, and I appreciate the time, and I don't want to take up any more.
Okay, thank you for your comments, sir. Commissioners, any
I have a question now.
Yeah.
He answered my question, and it was, would the owner be interested in applying for a CUP? But is that something available to him? And is that something we would consider? It's not available to him, it's no.
It would require a zone text amendment to allow a CUP.
Chair, I just wanted to add, thank you to for Todd for coming on and sharing your thoughts. The report was very thorough, the 62 pages. I appreciated the perspective. But I do want to emphasize that just my method of getting ready for these meetings is to go knock on doors and talk to your staff, your folks who are knee deep in the process every day and day out. The information I got was from them. The testimony from the other thrift store folks were from them. The neighboring businesses was from them. So I've learned a lot from them. And I don't know that it's a possibility that you could run the thrift portion at that site without the donation part of it, since that seems to be the hindrance in my mind. Just food for thought. But I just wanted to thank you for presenting.
Okay, and are there any further comments before we finalize direction to staff?
I have not changed my comments.
I'll be a no to the change.
Okay, well, then it sounds like we are still where we were before hearing from the two speakers. And then I guess our
If
our
we
direction.
can, can we have someone make a motion then? It sounds like we need a motion to direct staff to, it sounds like there's not a motion to direct staff to have them process a zone text amendment. So if we can just get a motion and a vote on that, whatever commissioner wants to make that motion, we need someone.
So
to make
that was, I was going to ask if we actually needed a motion. So yes, it sounds that we do need a motion. And so then I will make the motion to direct staff not to put together a zone text amendment on this issue.
I'll second.
And that was seconded by Commissioner Alexander. Is this, will this be on the screen for us to vote?
Yes, it should be.
All right, there we have, motion passes 3-1. And then, do we have any, do we have a report from the director tonight?
No report? Oh, just as you all met, Renee Aguilar is our new associate planner. So this is his first night here with you, and you'll see him in the future. But we have a couple of new staff, so you'll see their faces come through as they start presenting some cases.
All right, welcome aboard, Mr.
Welcome aboard,
Aguilar.
Mr. Aguilar.
Thank you.
All right, then, any comments or reports from the commissioners?
I just wanted to say, let this discussion tonight be no reflection on your presentation. It's just the subject matter, so thank you.
All right, and then says we are scheduled for a meeting on our next meeting Monday, November 20th at 6 o'clock here in the chambers. And with that, we are adjourned.
Thank you, everyone.